Before we dive into tonight's tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more creepy stories that will keep you up at night. It's one of those blistering afternoons out near Pecos, Texas, where the sun doesn't just shine, it hammers down on you like it's got a personal grudge. The fracking rig sits there in the middle of nowhere, a rusty beast of steel and grease, surrounded by flat, cracked dirt that's been baked to a crisp. The air's thick with the rumble of machinery, those big pumps chugging away, sucking oil from deep under the earth. You can smell it too, that sharp tang of crude mixed with dust and sweat. The crew's scattered around, wiping their brows, kicking at the ground. There's a little break area, a beat-up trailer with a sagging awning, and inside, an old box TV is flickering to life, its screen streaked with static. The sound cuts through the usual noise like a knife. That high-pitched beep-beep-beep of an EAS alert. You know, the kind that makes you sit up straight even if you're half asleep. The voice comes on. Robotic and cold. Emergency alert. Evacuate Pecos County. Subsurface instability detected. It loops once, twice, before the static swallows it again. Raul Fuentes is leaning against the trailer's doorway, a wiry guy with sunburned skin and eyes that carry too much weight, like he's seen things he can't unsee. He lost his brother Miguel out here a few years back, some freak accident nobody talks about, and it's left him hollowed out. He smirks at the TV, shaking his head, and flicks a half-empty beer can into the dirt. "Instability, my ass," he mutters, loud enough for the crew to hear. "They've been saying that since '09. Still here, ain't we?" The guys laugh. Pete, a stocky dude with a patchy beard, slaps the table, spilling some of his soda. "Yeah, man, what's next? Alien invasion?" They're all in on it, tossing jokes back and forth, the kind of dark humor you lean on when you work a job that chews people up. The TV keeps crackling, but they've already tuned it out. Raul steps outside, squinting into the glare, the heat rippling off the ground in waves. He's about to light a cigarette when the earth gives a little hiccup. A tremor, sharp and quick, like someone kicked the rig from below. Tools clatter off a workbench. A couple of the guys curse, steadying themselves, but before anyone can crack another joke, there's this sound, like a bone snapping, loud and wet. Then it happens. The ground splits right in front of the trailer, and this jagged thing, looks like a massive, twisted animal bone, shoots up from the dirt. It's fast, too fast, and it catches Pete right in the arm as he's turning to run. The spike punches clean through his bicep, pinning him to the side of the trailer like a bug on a board. He lets out this scream, high-pitched, ragged, the kind that makes your stomach twist. The crew freezes, staring, as this thin, black film starts creeping up Pete's arm from the wound. It's not blood, it's too dark, too shiny like oil with a mind of its own. It wraps around him, pulsing faintly, cocooning his arm, then his chest. He's thrashing, yelling, "Get it off me, Raul, help!" But nobody moves. They can't. They're just watching, mouths open, as Pete's voice gets muffled under that black stuff. That's when the Jeep rolls up, kicking up a cloud of dust that stings your eyes. Sophie Kim climbs out. All business, short hair tucked under a baseball cap, a heavy backpack slung over one shoulder, stuffed with seismic gear that clanks as she walks. She's a geologist, the kind who doesn't mess around, and her face is tight, like she's already expecting bad news. She strides over to the crew, boots crunching on the gravel, and doesn't even glance at Pete, just zeroes in on the spike sticking out of the ground. "You need to shut this down," she says, her voice clipped. "I've been tracking tremors all week. There's a sinkhole forming under this site. You're sitting on a powder keg." Maggie Dunn's already storming out of the office trailer, clipboard in hand, her steel-toed boots slamming the ground like she's trying to punish it. She's the site manager, tough as nails, with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, obsessed with hitting her quotas. She doesn't even let Sophie finish. "You got no authority here, lady," she snaps, jabbing a finger at her. "We've had eggheads like you sniffing around before. It's always nothing. Take your toys and get off my site." Sophie starts to argue, pulling out a tablet to show some graph with squiggly lines, but Maggie's already turning away, barking at the crew to get back to work. Raul's not listening, though. He's staring past them, out toward the edge of the rig where the dust is swirling a little thicker. For a second, just a heartbeat, he swears he sees something in it. A shape, tall and thin, like Miguel standing there in his old coveralls, the ones he wore the day he died. The shadow shifts, and Raul hears it, a whisper, faint but clear as day. Raul. His name, in Miguel's voice. He blinks, and it's gone, just dust again. He shakes it off, tells himself it's the heat messing with him, but his hands are trembling as he fumbles for that cigarette again. Meanwhile, one of the younger guys, Jimmy, barely out of high school, grabs a wrench from the ground and edges toward the bone spike, still pinning Pete. "What the hell is this thing?" he mutters, half to himself. He taps it with the wrench, and there's a sharp crack, like glass breaking under pressure. The spike splits at the tip, and this black liquid sprays out, catching Jimmy's hand. He yelps, dropping the wrench, and stumbles back, clutching his wrist. The stuff burns. It's sizzling on his skin, leaving these weird, dark veins that twitch under the surface, like something's crawling in there. "It's alive!" he shouts, shaking his hand like he can fling it off, but the veins just spread, slow and steady. The wind picks up then, hot and dry, whistling through the rig's pipes. But there's something else in it. A low hum, deep and guttural, like the ground itself is clearing its throat. It's not loud, but you feel it in your chest, rattling your ribs. The crew's on edge now, backing away from Pete, who's gone quiet. His cocoon's still twitching, though, that black film rippling like it's breathing. Then it happens, soft at first, but unmistakable. A hiss comes from inside it, and it's Pete's voice, warped and echoey, saying, "Raul." Except it's not Pete's voice. Not really. It's Miguel's. Raul staggers back, the cigarette falling from his fingers, his breath catching in his throat. The rest of the crew hears it too. They're looking at each other, wide-eyed, like they're waiting for someone to say it's a prank. But nobody does. That chill settles over them, heavy and real, as the hum grows louder, rolling into the night that's starting to creep over the horizon. So, night's fallen over the rig now, and it's not one of those peaceful Texas nights where the stars stretch out forever. No, this is a thick, heavy darkness, like someone draped a blanket over the world and forgot to poke holes for air. The floodlights are doing their best, buzzing and flickering, casting these jittery pools of yellow across the dirt. But it's not enough. The shadows keep shifting, playing tricks on your eyes, and the air's got this stale, metallic bite, like old pennies left out in the rain. That hum from earlier? It's still there, deeper now, vibrating through the ground and up into your boots, making your teeth ache if you stand still too long. The crew's barely had time to process Pete. Poor bastard still pinned to the trailer, wrapped up in that black cocoon, when the earth decides it's not done with them yet. There's this low groan, like the planet stretching its bones, and then the ground near the rig's main pump just gives. A sinkhole rips open, wide and jagged, swallowing a stack of oil barrels like they're nothing. The guys closest to it, Jimmy included, scramble back, shouting, but they're not fast enough to dodge what comes next. This black liquid gushes up from the hole, thick and glossy, splashing onto the dirt. It doesn't pool like water should. It moves, slithering outward, and where it touches the ground, these bone spikes start shooting up. They're not random either. They're sharp, curved like ribs or claws, and they're fast. One catches a trailer's corner and tears through the metal like it's paper, pinning it to the earth. Another spears right through the brake area, smashing that old TV to bits mid-alert. The screams start then, raw, panicked yells as more spikes erupt. One of the guys, a big fella named Carlos who's been quiet all day, gets caught mid-run. A spike punches through his leg, and before he can even fall, that black film's already climbing him, wrapping tight. He's thrashing, clawing at it, but it's no use. Within seconds, he's cocooned, his screams turning into this muffled, wet gurgle. The rest of the crew scatters, tripping over tools and each other, but the spikes keep coming, boxing them in. Raul's near the edge of the chaos, his heart pounding so hard he can feel it in his throat. He spots Sophie. She's still by her jeep, fumbling with her gear, her face pale under the floodlights. "Move," he shouts, voice cracking, and he bolts toward her just as a spike surges up from the dirt, missing her by inches. It grazes her leg instead, rips right through her jeans, leaving a shallow gash. She gasps, stumbling back, and Raul grabs her arm, yanking her toward a stack of crates for cover. "You okay?" he pants, crouching low. She nods, but then she winces, pulling up her pant leg. There's these blisters forming where the spike nicked her. Small, red, and angry at first, but they're swelling fast, and here's the kicker. They're moving. Little squiggles under her skin, like worms testing the waters. "What the hell?" she whispers, her voice shaking as she presses a hand to it, like she can push them back down. Rawl's staring, his stomach turning, but there's no time to figure it out. Maggie's not far off, barking orders like she can still control this mess. She's got the radio from the office trailer clutched in her hands, her knuckles white, her usual scowl replaced with something twitchy. Fear, maybe, though she'd never admit it. "This is done at Site 17. We need evac now. Something's..." Static cuts her off, loud and harsh, drowning her out. She smacks the radio against her palm, cursing under her breath. "Come on, you piece of junk!" But it's just more static, buzzing like a swarm of flies. She looks up, locks eyes with Rawl, and there's this moment where you can tell she's out of moves. "We gotta get out of here," she says, voice low, and for once, nobody argues. They make a break for it, Rawl half carrying Sophie, who's limping now, Maggie leading the way with that radio still spitting noise. The rig's a war zone behind them, trailers skewered, cocoons twitching where the crew used to be. They head for the only thing that looks halfway safe, this rickety old church perched on the edge of the site. It's been there forever. Nobody knows why a fracking outfit's got a church, but it's all wooden planks and peeling paint, with a crooked steeple that sways in the wind. The door creaks open as they get close, and there's Father Elias Vega, this weathered old priest with a face full of scars and a rosary dangling from his gnarled hands. "Inside, quick!" he calls, waving them in, his voice rough like he's smoked too many unfiltered cigarettes. They pile in, slamming the door shut, the sound echoing in the empty space. Inside, it's dim, just a few candles flickering on the altar, throwing long shadows across the pews. The air smells like dust and wax, and there's this faint creak from the floorboards as they catch their breath. Elias is pacing near the front, muttering prayers under his breath, his rosary beads clicking together. Maggie slumps against a wall, still fiddling with the radio, but it's dead now. No static, no nothing. Sophie's sitting on a pew, her legs stretched out, staring at those blisters. They're bigger now, pulsing faintly, and she's poking at them with a pen from her pocket, wincing every time they shift. "This isn't seismic," she says, half to herself, her voice tight. "It's biological. Something's alive down there. Fracking must have woken it up." Before anyone can process that, there's a loud crash, glass shattering, sharp and sudden. A bone spike smashes through the stained glass window above the altar, showering the floor with colored shards. It catches one of the stragglers, a guy named Tom who'd been muttering prayers since they got in, right through the chest. He's lifted off his feet, pinned to the wall, and that black film starts wrapping him up. His cocoon hardens fast, but then it screams, this eerie, high-pitched sound that's half a hymn, half a wail, echoing off the rafters. Elias drops his rosary, stumbling back, his scarred hands trembling. "Lord have mercy," he breathes, but it's clear he's not so sure about that anymore. Sophie's gear starts buzzing then, her tablet, still hooked to the sensor she'd planted earlier. She pulls it out, squinting at the screen. "This isn't right," she says, tapping at it. "It's not seismic activity, it's a pulse, like a heartbeat." Rawl's pacing now, running a hand through his sweaty hair, trying not to look at Tom's cocoon. Maggie's had enough. She stomps over to a rusty filing cabinet in the corner, one she must have hauled in from the office ages ago. She yanks out a drawer, digging through papers until she pulls out this old logbook, its cover stained and curling. "Found this when we took over," she says, flipping it open. "Back in '87, they sealed the well after unexplained growths. Said it was too dangerous to keep drilling." She tosses it onto a pew, dust puffing up around it. Outside, the spikes are glowing now, just a faint, sickly shimmer, but it's there, pulsing in sync like they're all part of the same thing. Rawl's by the window, peering through a crack in the boards. When he hears it, a sharp snap. He spins around and there's Pete's cocoon, dragged in from the rig somehow, propped against the wall. It's cracking open, slow and deliberate, and this claw-like hand, too long, too bony, scratches at the air. Rawl flinches, stepping back, his boot crunching on broken glass. That hand keeps moving, reaching for nothing, and the hum outside swells, rolling into the church like a wave, promising worse is on the way. The night outside that rickety church is blacker than black. No moon, no stars, just a void pressing down on the world like it's trying to smother it. Inside, the air's thick with the smell of old wood and candle wax, but now there's something else, something sharp and sour like wet rust. The walls are groaning, creaking under some unseen weight, and every few seconds there's a thunk, another bone spike punching through the planks like they're nothing. They're coming in slow, deliberate, curling inward like fingers testing a grip. The floodlights from the rig are long gone, swallowed by the dark, and all that's left is the faint glow of those candles on the altar, flickering like they're scared to stay lit. Rawl's at the front doors, his shoulders heaving as he shoves another pew against them. The wood's splintered and warped, and he's got sweat dripping into his eyes, stinging like hell. "Help me with this," he snaps at nobody in particular, dragging a second pew over. Jimmy's still around, shaky, pale, his hand wrapped in a rag from where that black stuff burned him, and he stumbles forward, grabbing the other end. They slide it into place, the legs screeching across the floor, and Rawl steps back, wiping his face with his sleeve. "That's not going to hold forever," he mutters, half to himself, eyeing the spikes already poking through the gaps. One of them twitches, bending inward, and he swears he hears it crack like a knuckle popping. Father Elias is up near the altar, his voice rising and falling in this frantic chant, bits of scripture spilling out like he's trying to build a wall with words. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." He's clutching that Bible to his chest, the rosary still tangled in his fingers, beads clicking as his hands shake. Maggie's watching him from the corner, her arms crossed tight, that logbook still open on the pew beside her. "Divine wrath, huh?" she says, her voice sharp but brittle, like she's daring him to argue. Elias doesn't look up, just keeps going. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures," until there's this sudden thwack. A spike bursts through the wall right behind him, skewering his Bible dead center. The pages tear, and this black ooze dribbles out, thick and slow, dripping onto the floor. Elias freezes mid-verse, his mouth hanging open as the book slips from his hands and lands with a dull thud. "That ain't God," he whispers, stepping back, his scarred face chalk white. Sophie's still on that pew, her legs stretched out in front of her, the blisters now a nasty mess, puffy and dark, stretching up her calf. She's got her tablet balanced on her lap, but her eyes are on her skin. She brushes a finger over one of the blisters, hesitant, like she's touching something she shouldn't. There's this faint hiss, like static from a busted radio, and she yanks her hand back, wincing. "It's talking," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. Rawl's nearby, catching his breath, and he turns to her, frowning. "What'd you say?" She swallows hard, her fingers hovering over the spot. "When I touch it, I hear static, like voices, but not words. It's in my head." She looks up at him, her eyes wide, and there's this edge to her, like she's trying not to lose it. Rawl doesn't know what to say to that. He's already on edge, his mind still stuck on Pete's claw hands scratching the air, so he starts pacing, boots thudding on the creaky floor. He's looking for anything, something to do, something to hold on to, when he spots a trapdoor near the back, half hidden under a faded rug. "Hey, over here," he calls, waving Maggie over. She trudges across, still clutching that dead radio, and helps him pull the rug aside. The trapdoor's old, rusted at the hinges, and it squeals like a dying animal when they pry it open. A damp, musty smell wafts up, and Rawl grabs a candle from the altar, holding it over the hole. "Cellar," he says, peering down. "Might be something useful." He climbs down first, the wooden steps bowing under his weight, and Maggie follows, her boots clanging on the rungs. The cellar's small, cramped, really, with dirt walls and a low ceiling that forces Rawl to duck. There's a pile of rusted drills in one corner, their bits caked with grime, and a shelf with some old cans of paint, labels peeling off. But what catches his eye is this ancient tape recorder sitting on a crate, its plastic casing cracked but intact. He picks it up, blowing dust off the buttons, and presses play. There's a whir, a click, and then a voice crackles through, gravelly, scared, definitely from '87 by the sound of it. "The bones are building something," it says, hurried like the guy's out of breath. "We sealed it, poured concrete, prayed it stay down, but it remembers. It knows we're here." The tape cuts off with a scream, sharp, cut short, and Raul drops the recorder like it burned him, the candle wobbling in his other hand. Maggie's staring at it, her jaw tight. "That's what the log meant," she says, her voice low. They knew. Back upstairs, things are getting worse. The walls are alive with sound now, this scraping, dragging noise like nails on a chalkboard, but slower, heavier. Raul climbs out of the cellar just in time to see them. Bone figures, humanoid shapes made of those spikes, clawing at the outside of the church. They're not solid, more like skeletons held together by that black liquid, their joints creaking as they move. Their shadows flicker across the boarded windows, long and twisted, dancing in the candlelight. Jimmy's pressed against a wall, muttering, we're dead, over and over, his rag-wrapped hand trembling. Maggie's near the altar, eyeballing one of the spikes that's pushed through the floor. It's glowing faintly, pulsing, and then it cracks. A small split, and this black liquid oozes out, pooling on the wood. But it doesn't stop there. The puddle shifts, molds itself into this tiny, eyeless skull, barely the size of a golf ball. It sits there for a second, then lets out this soft, high-pitched giggle, like a kid playing a prank. Maggie jumps back, kicking at it, but it just rolls away, still giggling until it smashes against a pew and dissolves into a smear. "What the hell is this thing playing at?" she snaps, her voice shaking despite the bravado. Then the radio, dead as a doornail a minute ago, crackles to life. That EAS tone cuts through the air, and the voice comes on. Remain indoors. Containment in progress. It's calm, steady, but here's the twist. It's Elias's voice, younger, smoother, like it was recorded decades ago. The real Elias spins around, his eyes bugging out. "That's not me," he stammers, backing away from the radio. I didn't. But the broadcast loops, remain indoors, and he's shaking his head, hands clawing at his face. Raul's watching him, a cold knot tightening in his gut, because Elias's fear isn't just shock, it's guilt, plain as day. And outside, those bone figures keep scraping, the hum building into something that sounds way too much like a heartbeat, promising this church isn't the sanctuary they thought it was. Dawn's creeping in, but it's not the kind of sunrise that makes you feel safe. The sky's this bruised, grayish purple, like the world's nursing a hangover it can't shake. Inside the church, the pews are rattling now, a low vibration buzzing up through the floorboards from that sinkhole outside. It's not just a hum anymore, it's a growl, steady and deep, shaking dust loose from the rafters. The candles have all burned down to stubs, leaving little pools of wax that tremble with every pulse. Raul's by the barricaded doors, his hands braced against a pew, watching the bone spikes poke further in, splintering the wood. Jimmy's still huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, his rag-wrapped hand clutched to his chest like it's the only thing keeping him together. Then it happens, fast, brutal. The doors don't just give, they explode inward, wood shards flying like shrapnel. Those bone figures, tall, jagged things made of spikes and black ooze, lurch through, moving with this jerky, unnatural grace. One of them grabs a cocooned worker. Tom, maybe. It's hard to tell anymore. His black shell still dangling from the wall where that spike pinned him. The figure's claw-like hands wrap around it, and with one quick yank, it's dragging the cocoon out into the dark, Tom's muffled hymn fading as he's pulled toward the sinkhole. Raul's already moving, shouting, "Sophie, come on!" She's limping bad now, those blisters on her legs swollen and dark, but she grabs her backpack, slinging it over her shoulder as they bolt after the figure. Maggie's yelling something behind them. "Wait, you idiots!" But Raul's not stopping, not with that pit swallowing everything he's got left. They stumble outside, the air hitting them like a slap, cold, damp, and heavy with that metallic stink. The sinkhole's wider now, a gaping maw in the earth, its edges crumbling as more black liquid bubbles up. The bone figure's ahead, disappearing down a slope, and Raul and Sophie half run, half slide after it, dirt clods breaking under their boots. They hit the bottom and find themselves in this cavern, some natural hollow the sinkhole must have cracked open. The walls are lined with spikes, pulsing faintly, their surfaces slick with that black stuff. But it's not just spikes. There are faces pressing out from the walls like they're trapped under a thin layer of tar. Dozens of them, silent, their mouths moving in slow, pleading shapes. Raul freezes, his breath catching, because one of them's Miguel, his brother's face, unmistakable, those same tired eyes and crooked jaw. He's mouthing something, Why? Over and over, and Rawl's legs nearly give out. Miguel, he chokes out, reaching toward the wall, but Sophie grabs his arm. Rawl, don't touch it, she says, her voice sharp, pulling him back. That's when Elias staggers in behind them, his cassock torn, his scarred hands clutching a knife, one of those old pocket blades with a chipped handle. He's breathing hard, his eyes wild, and before anyone can ask what he's doing, he starts talking, fast, like he's been holding it in too long. I was here in '87, he says, his voice cracking. We drilled too deep, woke it up. The bones started growing, taking people. We sealed it, buried the crew alive, poured concrete over the well, my crew. He's shaking now, the knife trembling in his grip. The EAS, that was me, recorded it, looped it. It's been waiting, calling for more. It needs blood to wake up all the way. He locks eyes with Sophie, and there's this awful clarity in his face. It's God's will, he mutters, and then he lunges. The knife catches Sophie in the side, just below her ribs, a quick, messy stab. She gasps, doubling over, blood soaking through her shirt as she hits the ground. Rawl's on Elias in a heartbeat, tackling him, slamming him into the cavern wall. What the hell are you doing? He roars, pinning the old man's arms, but Elias just keeps chanting. It's God's will, it's God's will, his voice rising into a scream. Sophie's crawling away, clutching her side, blood dripping between her fingers. It hits the dirt near the sinkhole, and the ground drinks it, sucking it down like it's thirsty. Then Sophie starts screaming, not just pain, but something worse. Spikes burst out of her, small at first, from her arms, her back, jagged and black, tearing through her skin. She's writhing, her voice breaking into this awful, echoing wail as the spikes grow, pinning her to the earth. Maggie's there now. She must have followed them down, her boots sliding in the loose dirt. She's got a handgun, one of those beat-up revolvers she keeps in the office trailer, and she's unloading it into the bone figures still lurking near the cavern's edge. The bullets hit, but they don't do much, just sink into the black ooze like it's tar, leaving little ripples before the figures keep moving. Die, you bastards, she shouts, her voice raw, but one of them turns on her, fast. A spike lashes out, catching her shoulder, driving deep. She stumbles, dropping the gun, and grabs at the wound. Blood's pouring out, but then her eyes, those sharp, pissed-off eyes, go black, like ink spilling over. She freezes, then lets out this laugh, low and wrong. It's beautiful, she says, grinning, her voice dreamy as she stares at the sinkhole. The spike's still in her, but she doesn't seem to care. She's just standing there, swaying like she's drunk on whatever's flowing through her. Rawl's still grappling with Elias, but he looks up, and that's when he sees it. The black liquid's moving again, dripping upward from the sinkhole's edge. It's defying everything, pooling into this web overhead, stretching across the cavern's ceiling like a spider's work gone wrong. It pulses, thick strands swaying, and Rawl can hear it. Whispers, dozens of them, overlapping in the air. Miguel's face is still there in the wall, still mouthing, "Why?" And Sophie's screams are fading into gurgles as the spikes overtake her. Elias shoves free, scrambling toward the sinkhole, knife raised like he's about to finish what he started. And the hum's so loud now, it's rattling Rawl's skull, promising something big, something alive, is about to climb out of that pit and take them all. The cavern's trembling now, like the earth's got a fever it can't shake. That hum's turned into a full-on rumble, shaking loose dirt from the ceiling, and Rawl's still reeling from Elias's betrayal, his fists clenched as the old priest scrambles toward the sinkhole. But before anyone can make another move, there's this sound, like a crack of thunder mixed with a scream, and the church above them just gives. The roof caves in, wooden beams snapping like twigs, crashing down into the pit. Rawl ducks, throwing himself over Sophie's twitching, spiked form, shielding her as dust and debris rain around them. The walls buckle, and through the hole where the church used to be, something starts rising, slow, massive, and wrong. It's a Colossus, skeletal and towering, at least 30 feet high, pieced together from those bone spikes and dripping with that black liquid. Its ribs are jagged, its skull a hollow mess of cracks and ooze, and it pulls itself up from the sinkhole like it's been sleeping down there for centuries. The air splits with its roar, a deep, guttural bellow that rolls out across the flats, loud enough to shatter windows in Pecos miles away. Rawl's ears are ringing, his head pounding as he staggers to his feet, staring up at this thing. It's not just alive, it's making things. Smaller bone figures start spilling out of its chest, clawing their way free like they're being born, their jagged limbs scraping the dirt. They're whispering, soft, overlapping voices calling names. Carlos, Jimmy, Pete. And Rawls' gut twists, recognizing every one. Maggie's still standing there, that spike in her shoulder, her black eyes locked on the Colossus like it's the prettiest thing she's ever seen. She's swaying, that creepy grin plastered on her face, and before Rawl can yell at her to move, one of the bone figures lurches forward. It grabs her fast, its claws sinking into her arms, and drags her toward the Colossus. She doesn't fight it, she just laughs, this soft, airy sound, as it pulls her up into its ribcage. The bones part like a curtain, and she's tucked inside, pressed against the pulsing black liquid, her face blank but smiling, like she's dreaming something sweet. Rawl's shouting her name, "Maggie, snap out of it!" But she's gone, just a silhouette in that monstrous cage, swaying with its every step. Rawl's not thinking straight anymore. Anger, fear, whatever it is, it's got him moving. He scrambles out of the cavern, boots slipping in the dirt, and heads for the rig, or what's left of it. The fuel reserves are still there, these big dented tanks near the edge of the site, pipes leaking from where the spikes tore through. He's got a lighter in his pocket, the same one he fumbled with back when this all started, and he's muttering to himself, "Gotta stop it, gotta end this," as he rips a rag from his shirt, stuffs it into a pipe, and flicks the flame. The rag catches, fire licking up fast, and he backs away, heart hammering, as the tanks ignite. There's a whoomp, this deep, sucking sound, and then the explosion hits, a fireball rolling out, engulfing the Colossus in orange and black. The heat so intense it singes Rawl's hair, forces him to shield his face as he stumbles back. The Colossus staggers, flames licking up its bones, that black liquid sizzling and popping. For a second, Rawl thinks it's done, thinks he's won. But then it straightens, shaking off the fire like a dog shaking off water, and keeps coming. Its roar cuts through the crackling flames, and those smaller figures keep spilling out, unbothered by the heat. Rawl's running now, legs burning, but the ground shifts under him. Another spike shoots up, catching him through the shoulder, pinning him to a cracked trailer wall. He gasps, pain searing through him, blood soaking his shirt as he hangs there, helpless. The Colossus lumbers closer, and in the flickering firelight, he sees it. Miguel's face, not in the wall anymore, but in the flames themselves, nodding slow and steady like he's saying it's okay. Rawl's vision blurs, his breath shallow, but he can't look away. Sophie's still down there, in the cavern's wreckage, her spiked body twitching like it's fighting to move. The EAS crackles to life again. Somehow, through all the chaos, her tablet's still picking it up. It's her voice this time, warped and calm. Containment achieved. Stay calm. She's not even speaking, just lying there, spikes jutting from her chest, but the words spill out anyway, looping over the static. Rawl's fading, the pain numbing out, but he hears it, and it's the last thing that makes sense. The Colossus slows then, its roar softening into this weird humming lullaby, low and eerie, like something you'd sing to a kid who won't sleep. It turns, lumbering off toward the horizon, each step shaking the ground. The smaller figures follow, crumbling into dust as it goes, leaving little piles scattered across the dirt. But it's not over, not really. Along the highway stretching out from Pecos, new spikes start poking up through the asphalt. Small at first, barely noticeable, but they're there, glowing faintly. And if you listen close, you can hear it. These soft, giggling whispers rising from the cracks, echoing out into the empty dawn. The Colossus doesn't stop far, just a couple 100 yards from where the rig used to be, right at the old wellhead. It's this rusted, forgotten thing, half buried in the dirt, a relic from '87 that nobody bothered to dig up. The morning's still gray, the air thick with that damp, metallic tang, and the ground's littered with ash and crumbled bone from the explosion. Rawl's still pinned to that trailer wall, the spike through his shoulder holding him up like a rag doll. His shirt's soaked red, his breath's coming in shallow, raspy gasps, but he's watching. Eyes half open, fighting to stay awake, as the Colossus slows. It's massive, silhouetted against the bruised sky, and it drops to its knees with this deep, grinding groan, like an old machine giving out. The thing starts pouring itself back into the ground, black liquid streaming from its chest, its arms, even its hollow skull. It's not a rush, more like a slow bleed, dripping into the sinkhole with these wet, slapping sounds that echo across the flats. Where it hits, the dirt hardens, smoothing over into this mound, bone-white, polished, like a giant slab of marble sealing the pit shut. The smaller bone figures trailing behind it don't make it far. They stumble, their jagged limbs cracking apart, and one by one, they collapse into piles of dust, blowing away in the faint wind. Maggie's still up there, tucked in its rib cage, and as the Colossus empties out, the bones part one last time. Her body tumbles free, hitting the ground with a soft thud. She's lifeless, sprawled out in the dirt, but there's not a mark on her. No blood, no spikes, just that blank smile frozen on her face, like she's still dreaming whatever it showed her. Down in the cavern's wreckage, Sophie's spiked form is crumpled near the edge of the mound. The spikes jutting from her back and arms twitch once, then go still, collapsing into her like they're melting away. Her chest heaves once, twice, and she lets out this faint, ragged whisper. It's done. Her voice is barely there, more air than sound, and then she's gone, slumping into the dirt, her blood-streaked hand falling limp. The tablet's still next to her, cracked but glowing, its screen flickering with static. Rawl's fading fast now, the world blurring at the edges. The pane's dulled to a distant throb, and his head's lolling against the trailer wall, the spike creaking as his weight shifts. He hears it then, Miguel's voice, soft and close, like he's right there whispering in his ear. Stay with me. It's warm, familiar, and Rawl's lips twitch, almost a smile, as his eyes flutter shut. The wind picks up, swirling dust across his chest, and it settles into this faint handprint. 5 fingers, clear as day, pressed over his heart. His last breath slips out, a quiet rattle, and he's still. The handprint the only thing left moving as the dust shifts in the breeze. The silence doesn't last. There's a faint wail in the distance. Sirens getting closer, cutting through the morning haze. Hazmat-suited rescuers roll in, their trucks kicking up gravel as they skid to a stop near the mound. They're too late, way too late, and their voices are muffled behind masks, shouting orders over the whine of their gear. One of them, a wiry guy with a clipboard, spots Sophie's body and crouches down, gloved hands brushing the dirt off her tablet. It beeps, sharp, insistent, and he tilts it, squinting at the screen. There's a graph there, a jagged line pulsing slow and steady, deeper than it should be. Something's still down there, he mutters, voice tinny through his suit, and he stands, waving over another rescuer with a radio. The EAS crackles to life one last time, not from the tablet, but from one of their truck radios, cutting through the static with that cold, robotic tone. Hazard contained, do not drill. It loops once, then fades, leaving just the hum of the wind and the faint chatter of the crew. They're busy now, taping off the site, hauling out gear, but they don't notice the mound close-up. The camera, if there was one, would pan over it slow, that smooth bone surface, unnatural and still, with a highway sign rattling nearby. Route 285, bent and creaking in the breeze. Underneath, the spikes are there, small, subtle, twitching just below the dirt, spreading out like roots. They're growing, quiet but steady, and that hum's still hanging in the air, soft as a whisper, promising it's not over. Not yet. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.